I am your last speaker of this session, and I am following some of the most esteemed scientists in the world, and I hold them in great esteem. I am not a scientist. I don't even have any graphs or charts to show you. What I do know is politics, and I know people who use politics, who take the pseudoscience and turn it into policy that affects all of your lives. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Our government, at every level, is about to overpower us. America is drowning in a sea of rules and regulations, particularly under the excuse of saving the environment. We all know something is very wrong, and we're trying to fix it. Many in America attempt to fight against one issue or another as they try to understand what is happening to their country. But most fail to see the whole picture and are being crushed under a well-organized divide and conquer tactic that keeps them reeling from crisis to crisis. First, we've been terrorized into accepting that human society is on the brink of extinction because of man-made global warming. We've been warned that unless we take drastic action to reverse it, then islands will disappear and whole cities will be destroyed and polar bears will drown. But the evidence, as you've seen today over and over again, is overwhelming that global warming is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on humankind. The ClimateGate scandal proved beyond doubt that man-made global warming was mostly invented without scientific fact. An overwhelming majority of scientists are now telling us that investigative research shows any warming actually stopped in 1999, and as Willie Soon so aptly put it, it's the sun, stupid. That's it. Done. Crisis over. Man is not to blame. Hooray! The nation should be rejoicing. No need for expensive green cars, mercury-filled light bulbs, no government-enforced alternative energy, no special energy taxes, no extra governmental oversight committees, and no need for a climate czar. We can drill American oil and end our dependency on foreigners who hate us. And it will help us to stop funding terrorists. We are free. The environment is not in crisis. Rejoice. Rejoice. Well, that silence you hear is the news media which refuses to report any deviation from the global warming party line. That silence you hear is the complete ignorance on Capitol Hill where Congress continues trying to force passage of some kind of cap and trade, continuing to ignore what science is now proving that global warming is a hoax. And that science you hear is from global corporations which have bought into Al Gore's lie and invest heavily in the promised green economy. Why do they continue to promote a lie? Because the issue of global warming never was about protecting the environment. It's nothing more than the excuse to enforce a global governance over the planet by creating a new global economy based on the environment rather than on goods and services. In short, it's all about wealth redistribution, your wealth into a green rat hole. You know, during the Cold War, communists tried to get us to surrender our liberties and our way of life for the wisdom of Karl Marx. Americans didn't buy it. But now, they have taken the same claptrap and wrapped it all in a nice green blanket, scaring us with horror stories about the human destruction of the environment. And so we are now throwing our liberties on the bonfire like a good old-fashioned book burning, all in the name of protecting the environment. It sounds so friendly, so meaningful, so urgent. But the devastation to our liberty and our way of life is the same as if Lenin himself had ordered it. The root of this transformation of our once free society can be clearly traced to a very specific event into a very specific document resulting in a very destructive policy, one outlined in a UN document called Agenda 21, first revealed at the UN's Earth Summit in 1992. The working name of the policy is Sustainable Development. Now, while most have been told that sustainable development is just about conservation and management, it is really a code word for an entire economic and social agenda. Rather than good management of resources, sustainable development has come to mean denied use and resources locked away from human hands. And interestingly, it is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's not liberal or conservative. It is being implemented on a purely bipartisan basis. It is the official policy of the federal government, every state government, and nearly every city, town, and county in the nation, all done under the excuse of reducing our carbon footprint to prevent global warming that doesn't exist. But, like the lies behind the promotion of global warming, the international aspect of Agenda 21 is hidden and denied. As promoters tell us, it is just policy by local and state officials concerned about local development issues and comprehensive planning programs. A supporter of mine recently wrote a letter to the editor of the Gazette-Journal in Gloucester, Virginia, explaining why he thought Agenda 21 was a threat to our freedoms. The editor of the paper deliberately held up printing that letter until he could write a rebuttal which would appear in the same edition. Here is some of what that editor wrote. He said, quote, "There seems to be a growing concern that has gained traction of late that comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, and other instruments of community planning are all part of some vast global conspiracy to deprive property owners of their rights, a socialist or fascist, depending on who's speaking, master plan for world domination." The editor went on to say, while some legislators, planning commissioners, and other decision makers may have a personal agenda that trumps their civic duty, most seem to be acting in what they believe is the best interest of the public, and it is unlikely that they are all taking their marching orders from the United Nations and that organization's sinister-sounding Agenda 21. Simply put, he said, sustainable development merely means balancing present and future human needs while preserving the environment for generations to come. Hardly an evil plot. Linking a 1993 UN document to today's most recent comprehensive plan updates is quite a stretch, he concludes. Of course, this is the kind of condescending smirk those of us who have spent years studying this issue have come to expect. With 18 years of experience studying this issue, I think I can say with some confidence that this editor hasn't spent 10 minutes actually reading a single sustainable development document and comparing it to local development plans. Well, I have. And here's what I know. There's a new language taking over government. The typical city council meeting discusses comprehensive development, density, historic preservation, and partnerships between city and private business. Civic leaders organize community meetings led by facilitators as they outline a vision for the town enforced by consensus. Free trade, social justice, consensus, carbon footprints, partnerships, preservation, stakeholders, land use, environmental protection, development, diversity, visioning, open space, heritage, comprehensive planning, critical thinking, and community service are all part of this new language. What are they really talking about? What mental pictures come to mind when those words are used? The term sustainable development was born on the pages of a United Nations document called Our Common Future, the official report of the 1987 UN Commission on Environment and Development. As a result of this report, for the first time, the use of environmental protection and human development were tied to the age-old socialist goals of international redistribution of wealth. And that is the key to understanding the true purpose of sustainable development and all of its policies, a control of all facets of the economy. At the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, President George H.W. Bush, in signing the document, committed the U.S. to implement the policies of Agenda 21. In 1996, President Bill Clinton, in compliance with Agenda 21, created the President's Council on Sustainable Development. You might remember a great deal of discussion during the Clinton administration about the idea of a reinvention of government. Vice President Al Gore was put in charge of the reinvention, and that should have been our first clue. The reinvention, of course, was sustainable development. The purpose of the President's Council was to translate the guidelines of Agenda 21 into public policy to be administered by the federal government. And that has become the ruling authority through which a UN plan, Agenda 21, has become unquestioned U.S. policy throughout the nation. But still, we are told by proponents that sustainable development is nothing more than good environmental stewardship and that it is locally driven. Well, to accept that is a serious and dangerous mistake. So what is sustainable development? Regardless of what local planning groups tell you, the root of sustainable development is about a planned central economy and redistribution of wealth on a local, state, national, and international level. The process by which it is implemented creates a matrix of locked-away land or severe land use controls, control of energy and energy production, control of transportation, control of industry, control of food production, control of development, control of water availability, and control of population size and growth. And most of their policies and regulations are issued under the excuse of protecting the environment. This is the process through which America is being transformed into what your elected officials, it's what your elected officials are really doing as they use terms like comprehensive development plans, energy audits, open space, and historic preservation. That is Agenda 21 and sustainable development. Agenda 21 is not just policy. It is a complete system to change the way we think, the way we react, and the way we make decisions. And those who promote it have very specific answers as to how they want each of you to do those things. It's behavior modification. And that's why they call it an agenda. Let me show you what I mean. The Sustainable Development logo, used in most literature on the subject, contains 3 connecting circles, each labeled 1, social equity, 2, economic prosperity, and 3, ecological integrity. This is known commonly as the 3 E's. I will tell you straight out, discussing social equity, if you fail to grasp the social equity aspect of sustainable development, then you simply have no grasp of this issue, period. Social equity is based on a demand for social justice. Social justice is described as the right and opportunity of all people to benefit equally from the resources afforded us by society and the environment. Nice way of saying redistribution of wealth. And by the way, Karl Marx was the first to coin the phrase social justice. Today, the phrase is used throughout sustainabilist literature. It is the root of new policy initiatives. The sustainabilist system is based on the principle that individuals must give up selfish wants for the needs of the common good or the community. This is the same policy behind the push to eliminate our nation's borders, to allow the migration of those from other nations into the United States to share our individually created wealth and our taxpayer-paid government social programs. Borders, they say, stop the natural migration of the human race. National sovereignty, they say, is a social injustice. According to the sustainabilists, it is a social injustice for some to have prosperity if others do not. It is a social injustice for some to be bosses and others to be merely workers. It is an accepted concept of sustainable development that private property is an evil that is used to create wealth for a few. So too is business ownership. Profits are made at the expense of the people. And so, sustainable policy is developed from that starting position. As a result, social equity through sustainable development is a means to a forced utopia with promises of health care for all, jobs for all, housing for all, and equality for all. So the reason the government refuses to secure our borders is because it is committed to imposing sustainable development. The reason Congress refused to listen to your pleas against centralized health care is because it is committed to sustainable development. Go on Google and do a Google search of sustainable medicine, and you will find the Obama health care plan. The reason our local governments are imposing redevelopment and comprehensive development plans that include mixed use and low-income public housing projects, forced open space, and restrictions and controls on energy and water and population growth is because of the trickle-down of enforcement of sustainable development. This is why we say that sustainable development is at the root of literally all of the other issues you find yourself fighting. And economic prosperity, the second of the three E's. Sustainable development policy, economic policy, is based on one overriding premise, that the wealth of the world was made at the expense of the poor. It dictates that if the conditions of the poor are to improve, wealth must first be taken from the rich. The international system of Agenda 21 encompasses the free trade movement that created the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and public-private partnerships, all pulled together into a government-driven economy called corporatism. It is not capitalism or free markets, though it may have some of the trappings. The marketplace is still there, but ultimately, corporatism does not trust the marketplace to do what the elites want done. The partnerships allow for special tax breaks, access to land for some developers but not for others, non-compete clauses in government projects that guarantee profits, access to grants and lucrative special government projects, and much more. Corporations that play ball get the power of government, and government gets to hide behind the independence of private business. Thus, the partnership between corporations and government is done at the expense of ordinary people, the exact opposite effect of free markets controlled by consumers. This is the new way business is being done in America under sustainable development. It's certainly not free enterprise or open markets. The true description is government-sanctioned monopolies right out of the Mussolini fascist playbook. And the third of the three E's, ecological integrity. To understand the power of the transformation of society under sustainable development, consider this quote from the UN's Biodiversity Treaty, which was also introduced at the UN's summit in 1992. Quote, "Nature has an integral set of different values, cultural, spiritual, and material, where humans are one strand in nature's web and all living creatures are considered equal. Therefore, the natural way is the right way, and human activity should be molded along nature's rhythms." End quote. This quote lays down the ground rules for the entire sustainable development agenda. It says humans are nothing special, just one strand in the nature of things, or put another way, humans are simply biological resources. Sustainablest policy is to oversee any issue in which man interacts with nature, which of course is literally everything. This is necessary, sustainabilists say, because humans only defile nature. In other words, sustainabilists view man as nothing more than a swarm of locusts which swoops down on nature and sucks it clean until there's nothing left. Nothing good comes from man, according to sustainabilist doctrine. And private property ownership and control is a main target of sustainable development. Consider this quote from the report of the 1976 UN Habitat I conference, which said, quote, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. The fact is, Agenda 21 is a blueprint to completely change our society to a top-down planned economy in a strange mixture of socialism, fascism, and corporatism. To convince Americans to accept it required something that would get us to sacrifice our natural rights voluntarily. The answer was environmental Armageddon. You must sacrifice freedom to protect the planet. It's urgent, we're told. Do you doubt that? Then consider this quote by Alexander King, the co-founder of the Club of Rome, and he said, in quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy, then, is humanity." So the urgency is on. Global warming and climate change are feeding the hysteria. There's no time to consider things like individual concerns, wants, and needs. Selfish, cries the sustainabilist. We must save the environment, go green, get out of your cars, stop using energy, sacrifice, cut your carbon footprint, or perish. And so, federal and state governments, working hand in hand with a horde of non-governmental organizations, private groups with personal political agendas, force passage of rules and regulations passed down to local communities. But say your local officials, none of that UN socialist stuff is true. Just conspiracy theories by right-wing radicals. We're just creating the tools necessary in a local effort to manage growth and development for our community, they say. Have you heard these? Then consider this quote from J. Gary Lawrence, a planner from the city of Seattle and an advisor to the President's Council on Sustainable Development. He said, quote, "Participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth." Local indeed. Sustainable development is the process by which America is being reorganized around a central principle of state collectivism using the environment as bait. This is a political movement led by those who seek to control the world economy, dictate development, and redistribute the world's wealth. They use the philosophical base of Karl Marx, the tactics of Adolf Hitler, and the rhetoric of the Sierra Club. Everything connected with sustainable development translates to higher costs, shortages, and sacrifice. The best way to understand what sustainable development actually is can be found by discovering what is not sustainable. Maurice Strong, the Secretary General of the UN's Rio Summit, said in 1992, quote, "Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable." So, how is this wrenching transformation being put into place? Well, there are 4 very specific routes being used. In the rural areas, it's called the Wildlands Project. In the cities, it's called smart growth. In business, it's called public-private partnerships. And in government, it's called stakeholder councils and non-elected boards in regional government, or reinvented government. First, the Wildlands Project was the brainchild of Earth First Dave Foreman, and it literally calls for the rewilding of 50% of all the land in every state back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus set foot there. In 1983, when Foreman first dreamed up this scheme for the Wildlands Project, he said, quote, "It is not enough to preserve the roadless, underdeveloped country remaining. We must recreate wilderness in large regions, move out the cars and civilized people, dismantle the roads and dams, reclaim the plowed lands and clear cuts, and reintroduce extirpated species. That is now the entire agenda of the federal government. Destruction of human civilization was Dave Foreman's goal. In reality, the Wildlands Project is a diabolical plan to herd people off the rural land and into human settlements, cities. Crazy, you say? Yes. Impossible? Not so fast. From the demented mind of Dave Foreman, the plan became the blueprint of the UN's Biodiversity Treaty. So now the scheme is international in scope with the power of law. Thomas Lovejoy, a science advisor to the Federal Department of Interior, said, "We will map the whole nation, determine development for the whole country, and regulate it." And your local elected officials are helping to implement this insanity. Yet they are quick to deny that such ideas have their origins on the international level, and they accuse me of wearing a tinfoil hat and hearing voices. Well, here's a voice I hear. Again, Maurice Strong, as he said at the Earth Summit, quote, "Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized nations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about?" And that is the true agenda that we face. But how do you remove people from the land? Well, one step at a time. There are many tools in place to stop human activity and grow the wilderness. Deny grazing and water rights on public lands. It becomes more difficult and more expensive to run a farm or a ranch, and eventually they go out of business. Lock away natural resources by creating more national parks. It shuts down the mines, and they go out of business. Call every mosquito-infested swamp and occasional mud puddle a wetlands, and ban any development around it. Invent a spotted owl shortage and pretend it can't live in a forest where timber is cut. Shut off the forest, then when no trees are cut, there's nothing to feed the mills, and then there are no jobs, and then they go out of business, whole towns die. Or a little more subtle for you. The state of Maryland is now considering a plan to ban septic tanks as a means to protect the Chesapeake Bay, even though there is no evidence that septic tanks do any damage whatsoever. The only result of the ban will be to make it impossible to live in a rural area unless you want to spend several $1 million on your own private water treatment plant. Cleverly, they don't ban building on private property or impose a land grab. They just make it impossible to live there. The Wildlands Project comes in many names and many programs: heritage areas, land management, rails to trails, open space, wolf and bear reintroduction, conservation easements, and many, many more. Each of these programs is designed to make it just a little harder to live on the land, a little more expensive, a little more hopeless. In reality, the process is simply herding people off rural land and into human habitat areas or cities. And that brings us to the second path to sustainable development, called smart growth. They put a line around the city and they tell you no growth can take place outside that line. Urban sprawl, they say disdainfully. They refuse to build more roads as a ploy to get you out of your car and into public transportation, restricting mobility. New highways, they say, are feeders to more development. They even stop the widening of existing roads for the same reason. So roads become overcrowded in gridlock, and they blame development. In many smart growth communities, new apartment buildings now have no garages or parking lots. We don't want any stinking cars there. Smart growth creates an unnatural restriction on space inside the controlled city limits, so there is a shortage of houses and prices go up. That means populations will have to be controlled because now there is a shortage of land. And that's why the kind, compassionate environmentalist Dr. Jacques Cousteau once declared, quote, "In order to stabilize world populations, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day." How's that done? Do you use the proven successes of China's population control methods of forced abortions and sterilization? The Chinese, I can tell you, are big supporters of sustainable development, and I'm sure that they can share some ideas with us. Of course, comprehensive development plans are the tools of choice in nearly every city in the nation to produce the proper smart growth community. Through these plans, energy and water are tightly controlled. Smart growth advocates force individuals to live in denser communities that take up smaller tracts of land per housing unit. Planning advocates and government bureaucrats are forcing such planned communities into the state and nation, and those plans put severe controls on private property. In fact, there can be no private property in a smart growth community. And the third way to sustainable development, inside the human habitat areas or the cities, government is steadily being controlled by an elite ruling class called stakeholder councils. These are mostly non-governmental organizations or NGOs who, like thieves in the night, just show up to stake their claim to enforce their own private agendas. The function of legitimate elected government within the sustainable system is fast becoming little more than the rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of the council. Once the councils are established, it becomes nearly impossible to discuss issues with your elected representatives. Instead, they will automatically refer you to the proper council or administration or department run by unresponsive, appointed hacks armed with their own political agenda. Consequently, they control almost all business decisions. They can dictate the kind of building materials you may use in your home or whether you can build on your property at all. They decide if roads are to be built, how much water can be used, how downtowns will look through historic preservation, how neighborhoods will be built. These non-elected councils fit almost perfectly the definition of a state Soviet, a system of councils that report to an apex council and then implement a predetermined outcome. Soviets are the operating mechanism of a government-controlled economy, the exact opposite of our constitutional republic. And the fourth path to sustainable development, as I mentioned, public-private partnerships. That means they can charge what they want and they can use the power of government to put their competition out of business. You hear their propaganda nightly on your television as their commercials tell you to go green. And they use Congress to build more wealth and power. GE used their partnership with government to ban their own product, the incandescent light bulb, and replace it with the new green bulbs. By next year, you won't be allowed to buy incandescent bulbs. Why? Because GE can make 3 times as much from the new ones because they're more expensive. Such is the reality of green industry. In fact, there would be no green industry if not for the billions of dollars in grant money shelled out to the partnerships to develop alternative energy schemes. Alternative energy amounts to less than 1% of our energy needs. And for every green job created, 2 in legitimate industry are lost because of green rules and regulations. America has now discovered that there is a near infinite amount of shale oil in literally every state. Rather than celebrate our good fortune to reduce gas prices and eliminate dependency on foreign oil cartels, the sustainabilists are rushing in a near panic to block the drilling of shale oil. So to the sustainabilist elite, who loathe competition in free markets, such a change in the status quo is terrifying because their control is highly profitable for those industries as they take the tax money through the public-private partnerships. And public-private partnerships are taking over highways and local water treatment plants in communities across the nation. It is not free enterprise, but a fascism that will only lead to tyranny. And it's all driven by the Agenda 21 blueprint of sustainable development. Truly, sustainable development is designed to change our way of life. Local mayors are a prime target of international forces. Let me give you just one example. In June of 2005, the UN set out to recruit the nation's mayors to directly impose sustainable development policy into our local communities. The mayors were invited to attend the UN's World Environment Day conference in San Francisco. As part of their participation, The mayors were pressed to commit to specific legislation and policy goals by signing a slate of UN accords. One document signed by the mayors was called the Urban Environment Accords. The document includes exactly 21 specific actions, as in Agenda 21, for the mayors to take, controlled by a timetable for implementation. The document included items to enforce the increase of renewable energy and for the reduction of energy consumption. But perhaps the most egregious action item offered in the Urban Environmental Accords dealt with the topic of water. Action item number 19 called for adoption and implementation of a policy to reduce individual water consumption. The UN document begins by stating, quote, cities with potable water consumption greater than 100 liters per capita per day will adopt and implement policies to reduce consumption by 10% by 2015. The 100-liter figure was a very clever use of numbers to vastly reduce water consumption. You must be aware that 100 liters is equal to about 26 gallons per person per day. According to the UN, each person should have less than 26 gallons each day to drink, bathe, flush toilets, wash clothes, water lawns, wash dishes, cook, take care of pets, and more. But according to the U.S. Geological Survey, Americans actually need 100 gallons per day to perform these basic life functions. The use of the 100 liters number versus 100 gallons is a direct attempt to mislead and actually cut water use by 75%. Consider also that there is no specific water shortage in most parts of the United States. Water is not an international issue, it's a very local one. These are the policies your local elected officials are implementing as they keep telling you it's all a local idea. Many Americans ask how dangerous international policies can suddenly turn up in local government, all seemingly uniform to those in communities across the nation and around the globe. The answer? Meet ICLEI, a nonprofit private foundation dedicated to helping your mayor implement all of his promises. Originally known as the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI, today the group has changed its name to simply ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. They needed to get the word international out of their name. But in 1992, ICLEI was one of the groups instrumental in creating Agenda 21. The group's mission now is to push local communities to impose sustainable development, and it's having an incredible success. ICLEI is now operating in more than 600 cities in all 50 states. The group is shooting for 1,000 member cities by the next 3 years. Climate change, of course, is the ICLEI mantra. ICLEI's programs are designed to decrease each city's carbon footprint, no matter what it costs the taxpayers. Here's just some of the programs ICLEI provides cities and towns in order to spread their own particular political agenda in the name of community service and environmental protection. They bring in software products and associated training, access to a network of experts, newsletters, conferences, and training workshops. They take the employees of each city and they train them to think on these terms. They bring in toolkits, online resources, case studies, fact sheets, policy and practice manuals, and then, of course, there's notification of relevant grant opportunities. Now, that's the important one, money with severe strings attached. Around the nation, ICLEI partners with other established organizations like the American Planning Association and the International City County Management Association, the ICMA. And then there's the Renaissance Planning Group and many more. These groups and hundreds more like them work hand in hand with groups like the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Governors Association, the National League of Cities, the National Association of County Administrators, and more that your elected representatives automatically belong to. That's how these policies quickly spread across the nation as enforced regulations. And here's some of the results of their efforts. Across the nation, State legislators are passing laws requiring cities and towns to establish comprehensive development plans that include high-density urban development areas, controls on energy and water use, controls on transportation, making it more difficult to drive cars, perhaps enforcing acceptance of light rail and high-speed trains. These laws are now being used as a weapon to force sustainable development at a rapid pace across the nation. Whole areas of communities are now being redesigned to encourage industry and office buildings as a means to build economic development. Of course, that means eminent domain trumps private property rights and private homes. In Chesterfield County, Virginia, residents face the whole array of suspects descending on them to create the Chesterfield County Comprehensive Land Use Plan. The Renaissance Planning Group is currently working with the American Planning Association and the ICMA. They have set up a steering committee that is basically composed of their own people. One of their efforts is called countryside zoning. It creates buffer zones between high-density urban areas right out of the Wildlands Project. Property values will go down, conservation easements will be enforced, and private property rights will be extinguished. Dave Foreman's demented dream lives on in Chesterfield County. Comprehensive development plans in city after city across the nation are enforcing schemes to cut their carbon footprint by controlling energy use. In Nebraska, the Omaha Planning Board voted 7-0 to recommend approval of the Environment Omaha Plan. This initiative is in partnership with the city of Omaha, and they say with the community, and a group called Omaha by Design. The partnership has proposed a comprehensive new environmental section to Omaha's master plan. It covers 5 major content areas, including the natural environment, urban form and transportation, building construction, resource conservation, and community health. It's the 3 E's all combined. It's all out of ICLEI's playbook. And Agenda 21, and there's nothing local about it. And it will all lead to shortages of resources and land, higher prices for energy, and loss of individual liberty, private property rights, and individual innovation. And the same thing is being done in literally every community in this country. Here's some of what you can expect from these plans from your city fathers who tell you that things are going to get better. One of the most popular tools now to control energy use is the energy audit and building review. They establish quotas for electrical use and for heating and cooling pumps and water use, weatherization of existing buildings, replacing incandescent light bulbs, and on and on. That means that government bureaucrats will come into your home or office building and determine the amount of potential energy use you should have. You will be given a list of recommendations necessary to bring your home or office building into compliance. These may include the need for a new roof, new energy-efficient appliances, new windows, so forth. Well, in Oakland, California, the City Council did just these things, and the result was an average cost for every single homeowner of at least $35,000 to comply. And if you don't comply, you will be fined and possibly unable to sell your home until you do. Across the nation, power companies in partnership with government planners are forcing the use of smart meters. These meters contain RFID chips. The technology enables the power company to keep track of how much power you are using and control, regulate, and ration your use of that electricity. They will set the temperature in your home. If they decide that you're using too much hot water for your showers or your washing machine or too much air conditioning, your electricity will automatically be turned down or even off. Moreover, a future goal is to have all appliances replaced with those containing the same RFID chips, which the smart meter will speak to for more regulations and control. There are now policies being advocated to place taxes on the use of toilet paper, on the number of miles you can drive, or on the use of plastic bags. The EPA is now providing funding to NGO groups to run training programs for people to photograph and report neighbors who may be committing crimes against the environment. And we're now finding that ICLEI While it's a convenient target because of its obvious ties to the UN, the American Planning Association may be the more dangerous player in the game. That's because the APA is in literally every city trusted as a legitimate, non-controversial, established organization. Nothing here to tie it to some international UN conspiracy, we're told. Well, again, not so fast. The APA just issued its new planning guide sent to every community in the nation. A quick look through it finds references to social justice, smart growth, promotion of affordable housing, protection of farmland, stopping urban sprawl, combating climate change, dealing with homelessness, energy preservation, provisions for child care, and more, all out of the social justice plank of Agenda 21. And then there is a section on property fairness, wherein the report discusses efforts by property owners to stop government land grabs where land is taken without compensation. The APA refers to these property owners as radical property rights organizations. These are the people who are making policy. These are the people your local elected officials trust to be mainstream. These are the true enemy of freedom in America. Welcome to the utopia of sustainable development. This is Big Brother at its worst. It's a planned economy controlled by your local officials and representatives in partnership with groups like ICLEI, whose organization's vice chairman, Harvey Revin, said, quote, "Individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective." I'm going to ask you, would any of your elected officials admit to enforcing communism in your community? Of course not. Then why are they so eager to be in partnership with an organization which does? The United States is not a global village run by elders who hand down rules from on high. We are a nation of individuals whose rights are supposed to be protected and guaranteed by the representatives we elect. We demand accountability from them. However, global forces which do not accept the unique American form of government sneak behind the curtain, avoiding controversy and honest debate. The only possible result can be the tyranny over a powerless electorate stripped of their rights, their property, and their self-determination. Global warming has been the excuse for the hysteria, but as we know, true science is now showing that to be the greatest hoax ever perpetrated. So there's no need for these dire policies to cut back our carbon footprint, forcing us to lock away land and resources and live in high-density cracker boxes. We all want a clean environment. However, what we are objecting to here is not environmental protection, but the process that is being used in its name. There is nothing local or innocent or normal about it. This is an international agenda created by ideological zealots working hand in hand through massive international gatherings sponsored by the United Nations. Their documents are carefully prepared for the signatures of leaders of every nation. And once signed, the bureaucrats of the nations use the documents, like Agenda 21, as a blueprint for legislation and regulations. To write that legislation, the bureaucrats work hand in hand with the same zealots who wrote the UN documents in the first place. And then these UN-sanctioned NGOs, such as the Sierra Club and the Nature Conservancy, team up with local groups like the American Planning Association and ICLEI to apply pressure and make sure local city councils and county supervisors toe the line. And as they dutifully put the agenda in place, these representatives tell you every step of the way that it's just a local plan. The resulting non-elected boards, councils, and regional governments appointed by an ecoligarchy answerable to no one is the perfect definition of a Soviet, a centrally controlled economy. I assure you, we cannot restore our unique American republic if our communities are little Soviets. Nor can we protect the environment if our economy is destroyed and free men are unable to make choices other than survival in a sustainabilist tyranny. The sustainabilists are using our carbon footprint as a measure of our guilt. And one fact is sure: if you have no carbon footprint, you are dead. Elected officials can no longer play ignorant about the origins of their policies. America is dying while they are denying. It is their elected duty to represent the people and protect them from the piranhas that are devouring our way of life. To save it, you must take action now. And understand that the main battle is being fought not in Congress, but on the local level. If America is to survive, you and I must stop Sustainable Development and Agenda 21 now, at every level of government. We must stand up and protest at every city council and commissioner meeting, at every planning board, and every consensus meeting. Fight the creation of non-elected councils and commissions and boards, because they can and will be used as a weapon against your ability to deal and reason with local government. Above all, refuse federal or state money or new sustainable programs and get rid of the old ones. And if ICLEI, or the American Planning Association, or any of their ilk, are now running things in your town, throw them out. Stop paying dues, disband anything they have built, and start looking for some high-grade tar and feathers. And if your elected representatives continue to ignore you while playing footsie with those leading this tyranny, then you must force them out of office. Your survival depends on it. Nameless, faceless bureaucrats wielding power in the back rooms, untouchable and unseen, is not freedom. The sustainabilists now haunt the upper levels of the federal government, our state houses, and our city council chambers. In these very dangerous times, it is very easy to despair over our nation's future. There is no question that times are bad. No question that things will get worse before they get better. No question that we must be vigilant and we must fight with all that we have. But we are beginning to move the rock of freedom uphill. We are on the threshold of great change, our change, because we are right, because we have the answers to the mess that they have made. They have achieved many of their goals, but they have not yet won. Their whole agenda is built on a house of cards that stands only when you are ignorant and compliant. And their arrogance and impatience to force their policy into place is resulting in a stir of the American people. After 18 years of issuing warnings about Agenda 21, as I've done, finally, opposition is being heard. In the past 7 months, 7 communities have taken action to revoke contracts with ICLEI, starting with Carroll County, Maryland, then Amador County, California, then Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, then Edmond, Oklahoma, then Las Cruces, New Mexico, then Spartanburg, South Carolina, and just a couple of weeks ago, Albemarle County, Virginia, the home of Thomas Jefferson. Every day, I talk to activists across the nation, hoping to be the community number 8 to kick these zealots out. We have begun to make progress, but they are baby steps and they're not enough. To win, we must face this issue head on and say its name, Agenda 21, until it becomes known by every American to be an evil that must be defeated. But as long as local, state, and federal governments continue to impose sustainable development without question or regard for the consequences, and as long as NGOs with their private agendas are allowed to impose their will without opposition, there can be no limited government, no private property, no free enterprise, and no individual freedom. Agenda 21 is the root of nearly every issue we face. If it continues infecting every aspect of our lives, our nation will die. Killing it is the only way to begin restoring freedom. Thank you very much.
Tom, as you know, I've followed you for most of that 18 years. And I know every word you say to be true. And about the only comment and criticism I have is that you just spent 95% of your time describing the terrible situation and less than 5% charging us to cure it. I think that ratio needs to be changed, that you can come off too much as a fearmonger by describing all the ills and not enough as a problem solver. And tomorrow when I give my talk on the psychology of fear, I hand out a card. On the back of that card are my favorite 10 reasons why man-caused climate change makes no sense. I think your newsletter should carry an action agenda for everybody, and maybe on the back of your card, so that everyone here can remember the problem, but have in front of them the actions that you just described in the last few minutes.
Jay, I totally agree with you. And let me explain that for 18 years, in a dead silence, we have been saying, listen, 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 to people who have paid absolutely no attention as this has come. And of course, that was what resulted in my book. Now tell me I was wrong after 18 years of writing these things. Finally, these things are coming to the forefront. All of our materials, everything we had created over all those years was, listen to me. A few months ago, finally, well, it's in the last half year or so, people have started listening. And I started getting phone calls from people saying, okay, I get it. What do I do? And I said, gee, I never got that far before. So we have been in a rush to begin to create materials, as you say. In fact, I produced an article just a few months ago, How to Fight Back. Some people have told me they used what I said in it, and they have won on their local level using that. So we're going to do more of that. But you're correct, but we're still trying to get people to hear us as well. So, yeah.
Following along the same thoughts, one subject you passed over pretty quickly as a clear and present danger is the government's attempt to get control of all the waters in the U.S. The original bill was written, they only had control of navigable waters. Over the years, they kept working upstream. The Supreme Court set them back a few years ago, and now Ken Salazar and the Department of Interior are trying to bypass that. One issue that everybody in here should write their representatives and senators, because this is a hot issue. Tell them that you do not want the Clear Water Act for anything except navigable waters, and tell them, whether you've ever been to a Tea Party meeting or not, tell them you represent the local Tea Party. You will get their attention, and they won't know the difference. The other thing, I agree that your talk is too depressing. There's a lot of people out there, in addition to the Tea Party, like the stewards of the range, Alec, and a number of people who are fighting the very things you're talking about. And it's not a hopeless case.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I agree with you about the water. You control the water, you control everything. And they are moving. That's always the aspects of the Law of the Sea Treaty, and there are several more in place to control even mud puddles they're going after. So you're absolutely right. But it is depressing, and I think we have to get you to understand the threat of it. What I'm frustrated about is that there are lots and lots of groups from our side that have fought cap and trade and global warming, done a wonderful job of that, but they dismiss this issue. And I believe that if you don't get this issue, then you don't really know what you're fighting. You're fighting lots of little issues. And we're trying to make people understand this is the root. I can trace it back to almost every issue that you're working on. And so that's why we're so strong about it. So, yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for this presentation. I have a slight disagreement with you about that America or the United States has rejected Marxism. It seems to me that...
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, well, however it was that you phrased it, I just want to possibly elaborate that we've spent blood and treasure over the last 65 years in United Nations undeclared wars, such as Korea, Vietnam, etc. and we've accepted most of the planks of Karl Marx's manifesto in the last 100 years. So this is a major problem that our political parties, which I consider the hierarchy, are crime families. And they've been implementing this agenda slowly but surely. And any comments on that?
No disagreement whatsoever. What I said was that during the Cold War, that they wanted us to accept the, openly, that's what the Soviets wanted, us to accept the ideas of Karl Marx. We could all go down the path together holding hands. And America stood up and fought against that. That was our front lines. But I totally agree with you. Inside and behind the scenes and so forth, these things have been slowly being done. Once the Iron Curtain came down, where did all those little Marxists go? They went into the environmental movement.
Yes, quite true.
And now you've got, Gorbachev with Green Cross and all that. They're the ones who've moved into the UN, driven the UN in the environment direction. And so, it's the same battle. It's the same stuff. So I totally agree with you.
Yes, and I've always enjoyed your articles on News with Views and other places, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being the Paul Revere in this on this issue. And Marxism is alive and well. It always has depended on fraud, as opposed to communism's pure brute force. It's the same objectives, but through fraud, and this is one of the biggest frauds you could ever be conceived. Yeah. Our local little town in Costa Mesa, California, just had its latest issue of the redevelopment agency that the high density units that are being built under the RDA, all the future ones, there's no longer a 10% low income requirement. It's got to be 100%. So it just goes from one step to another.
Yeah, and they're getting very blatant about it. They, as I said, they're getting impatient. They're moving as fast as they can, and that works in our advantage because where we were always saying, watch what's happening, you couldn't see it. Now it is so blatant, so out there that the average person is seeing it. And I have got right now approximately 100 emails that I received in this past week from people across the country who have been reading my materials, hearing what we have to say, saying, help me, what do I do? Can you come here and speak? Can you tell us, can you give us something to fight against this? And to me, there have been about 5 of us who have worked on this issue almost full time for the last 18 years, and no one was listening, and suddenly for all this to be happening is one of the most exciting things I've ever dealt with. And the county commissioners in Carroll County, Maryland were the first in January. Here are 5 county commissioners who were all elected in November. And Richard Rothschild, the head commissioner there, had my materials, and he moves in with the other 5 commissioners, or the other 4, and he tells them all this. They have stood pat. And interestingly enough, watching them, he showed me a video of the first night these 5 commissioners met with the planning board. These guys were used to all the wink-winks, and we're all good buddies here, and we're going to do what we're going to do. And they sat there and listened to them, and they're talking about this plan to redevelop this whole section of the county, to build businesses and so forth. And suddenly Richard says, what about property rights? And everybody on the board went, what property rights? He said, there are homes there. There are people who live there. They have a contract that this is their property. What do we do about that? They didn't know. A little while later, he said something about, what about the Constitution? What do you mean? Eventually, at the end of the meeting, the planning board rejected this comprehensive development plan. They sent them back to the drawing board and said, bring us back something that protects private property rights and is in compliance with the Constitution of the United States. First time anywhere in the nation. Richard is now going around the country teaching other county commissioners how to do this. The revolution is on.
Yeah, and I think what's really sad about that is I don't think much of our population understands the relationship between property rights and human rights.
I understand.
And thank you.
Yep.
On a global level, sustainability sounds like a great word. I'd like to substitute the word responsibility and personal responsibility. And I don't see the UN making any inroads into overwhelming population growth. What happened to people who as environmentalists, in a purist sense, said we shouldn't experiment with how many billions of people the population of the planet could be, but whether we should allow reasonable things to zero population growth, encourage that, rather than have war, famine, and disease do what they've always done. Does the UN address this at all in any of these plans?
They do. I mean, they in order to implement sustainable development, you've got to reduce population. That's one of the tenets of it. Because, as I said, you have created a shortage of artificial shortage of land, and so you can't have population. The thing is that the place where the population is exploding isn't in the United States, isn't in Europe, isn't in the industrialized nations of the world. It's in the poor nations, the third world countries, where there is no private property rights. People have absolutely no way to bring themselves out of poverty. They are totally dedicated to living on lifelong bread lines with somebody else feeding them. And this is where the population is exploding. And yet, at the same time, the sustainabilists are working with everything they have to stop any kind of development in those countries, to allow the mud huts to have an electric light bulb in it, anything like that. That's not sustainable. They're happy to have them living like that, and yet it is those who live in poverty and ignorance and so forth where the population is exploding. So, just like some of the demonstrations we've had here about how the whole global warming thing is the CO2 and everything is going against reality and what would be better, they're also doing the same thing with sustainable development and creating the population explosion. So, yeah.
But in some ways, we've given them death control, which some people are being denied with malaria not being controlled, but we're not giving them the mandates to have any population control. And we continue to feed them and just move them from famine to famine.
Yeah, we do, but it's a subtle thing. They are moving towards that. There are policies on it. Yeah.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, but on the tone, you really ought to have a look at Matt Ridley's Rational Optimist. He does a marvelous job, of tracing the history of how things have evolved and how much better things are and how much better they can, in fact, be. So I ain't ready to roll over, and I don't think it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket. But to listen to you tonight, I mean, honestly, for 18 years, nobody listens to me. Well, there's a reason they're not listening.
I disagree with you.
All right.
And now they are listening. That's the thing. So, thank you.